Good afternoon. I'd like to call this hearing to order. Today is July 30th, 2019, and we're here to discuss our budget and millage. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome you all to this public hearing to adopt the tentative millage and budget meeting. If you wish to speak during the hearing as citizens, please pick up a card in the back of the chambers, print your name and topic clearly, and return the card to our board assistant, Kathy Tompkins, sits over to my left. At the appropriate time, I'll call you up to speak. This is a meeting on the budget and millage, and I hope that you've come to talk about the budget and the millage, although I can't require you to do so. But I will say that I hope that you have come prepared to do that. With that, please join me and stand and let's salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Most of you may have noted that in the paper, the Herald paper on Saturday, we had 3 documents: a notice of proposed tax increase, a notice of tax for school capital outlay, and we had our budget summary, which were all inside the paper on Saturday, and that's what we're talking about today. But first, I want to read for you the statement regarding the 2019 proposed millage and tentative budget. The 2019 proposed required local effort millage rate represents a 1.87% increase over last year's rollback millage rate. The total 2019 proposed millage rate represents a 2.64% increase from last year's rollback millage rate. The operating millage is required to hire staff for the school district, pay negotiated salary and fringe benefits to staff, the cost of fuel, electricity, and other goods and services. Now moving on to item number 2, school board travel. Pursuant to the Florida Statute 1001.39, each member of the district school board shall be allowed reimbursement of travel expenses. Travel outside the district that exceeds $500 requires prior approval by the board. Confirming travel is the official business of the school board and complies with rules of the State Board of Education. This is a new statute this year. I would like to have a motion, please, to approve this as presented.
I would move that the school board approve the travel for official business as presented.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Before we vote on this, I'd like to offer anyone in the audience to speak on this issue. Do we have anyone who would like to speak about this? Hearing none, I would just say one thing. In the travel that I am doing this year, a lot of it will be done at the expense of the Florida School Board Association, and I will be traveling out of state, but I have not listed that here. If there are no other questions, then let's vote. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mine's not going either.
Eric Robinson.
While I will be voting for this agenda item, I'm sorry, Mr. Bowden, that's a very nice tie you have on. So it's just caught my attention. Distracted me with that, as a matter of fact. I think that next year I would like to see it, I don't expect it to be itemized. Itemized to me means this so much for hotel, this much money for travel, but I certainly think that breaking it out by meetings in dollars would be more appropriate, because when someone says $6,000 and they list 3 meetings, that implies that they could use the whole $6,000 on one meeting and not do it for the others, and not knowing how it's distributed amongst the meetings would influence how I would vote whether I'd approve the travel. If somebody said that they were going, somewhere and they were spending $3,000 to go to Tampa, that's different for me to vote for than if they said they got 6,000, and Tampa's one of the things in Tallahassee. So I'm simply requesting, although I'm going to vote it for this time, I just hope that next year that it's broken down so at least we can see how much it is per travel. And the other thing is some of them say conference meetings with an S, which really is the epitome of not breaking it out, because you've just said meetings with an S, which means, I don't know if that's 3 meetings, 4 meetings, 10 meetings. I don't know how many meetings that is. I don't know where the meetings are at. So it makes it really difficult to say that I approve this, that it's official school board business, when you don't know how much the meeting's going to cost. You don't know the location of the meetings. You don't even know how many meetings they are. So although I am going to vote for it this time, I just hope next time it would be in more detail so it'd make it easier for me to make my decision. Thank you.
Mrs. Ziegler?
Well, first, I want to thank Mitzi for pulling this information together. The last thing I really do want to do is add more things to your plate, but this is something I advocated for at the state level. I think it's not exclusive to school board. It's all governmental bodies in the state of Florida. And I know I brought something similar up when I was chair as to breaking down what our expenses were per individual board member. And the reason is really I want one for the transparency component, and really it comes down to, as individual board members, absolutely we want to support whatever you're going to be able to, what you feel is going to make you a more effective board member to serve and achieve the various policy elements or solutions that you ran on. So I support that. I would agree with Mr. Robinson's statement about breaking it down a little bit more, but overall I'm very excited to see this action taken, and so that, again, it's really about transparency for the community to see what individual elected officials are doing to support their role in their positions.
Mrs. Zucker?
Thank you. Well, I could not tell you how much it's going to cost for each one of the meetings because I don't know what hotels we'll be staying in. Look, when I go to Tallahassee, I don't know where they're going to put us up. So I don't know. Some hotels are almost $200 and some are cheaper. But FSBA picks the hotel, and that's where I go and stay. So I appreciate what you've done. It's transparent, although it was transparent to begin with, because these are the very same meetings I've been going to for 20 years. But thank you for picking it down and breaking it out like this, Mitzi. Much appreciated.
Mrs. Ziegler?
Well, just stemming off of what Mrs. Zucker had mentioned is the do not know. And again, this is a new statute, so kind of learning through it. But again, I believe like the intent was for the transparency component. And so I know we're taking it at the beginning of the fiscal year, but we already have the budget as far as a cost allocation in totality. And my only question is maybe going forward to Mrs. Zucker's point is perhaps it would be more prudent to wait until those particular items are scheduled in advance and then provide those as an action item to be approved, just as an option, since, stemming from what your comment was.
I am the board member that will be attending 3 different conferences, 2 in Washington and 1 in Chicago. I do have a matrix that I will give you that will show you a little more details as to where I'm going, and I'll be happy to provide that. So we had a motion and we had a second. Any other discussion? Please vote. And the motion carries 5-0. Next item is item number 3, the public hearing regarding proposed 2019 millage rate. Each speaker that is speaking will have 3 minutes to speak. When the timer flashes yellow, 1 minute remains, and you need to begin to summarize. You must stop immediately when the buzzer rings. I just want to make one statement. This is a hearing for millage and tentative budget. I hope your comments will be toward that, but I can't tell you exactly what to say. But I will say this, there's a very thin line between freedom of speech and defamation, and you'll be warned if you veer toward the defamation side. and the second time you'll be removed from the meeting. The first person and the only card that I have so far, I may have another one soon, I think, is Stephen Wise, please.
Thank you, school board members. My name is Stefan Weiss. I'm the father of Liam Weiss. I find it interesting that you can quote about freedom of speech and everything. I served 8 years in the military for people to be able to stand up here and say whatever they feel you're doing wrong and expect something in return. Because basically it says, school board sets policy for the school district and advances educational opportunities for all students. Well, several of you are not doing that. You've had a problem in your school district now since August of last year. My son, Liam, who goes to Oak Park, his teacher was assaulted and out for 8 months of the year. He had a substitute teacher for 8 months of the year, and the administration never even addressed it. That particular school had as many as 42 substitute teachers in a given day. 37 open positions sit there right now, and all you talked about were busing last week. All of you to the left here and to the right have said, well, we knew about this problem, we're going to address it, we're going to do this. As of yet, nothing's been held with parents from Oak Park. Last week, your superintendent was asked if he'd met with parents, and he kind of stepped around it by saying, well, I met with this principal, but there were some parents standing outside. That's not a meeting. There were 24 parents here 3 weeks ago. If he'd want to have a meeting, he could have asked them all to stay. Hey, I want to hear what you all have to say. None of this is personal. This is based on what I feel that is not getting done within our school district. But then I can look at the disingenuousness of some of the people on this board on how you've proposed contracts, some contracts without letting other members of the board know. Also, how sexual harassment has been a thing in the
Okay,
paper right
that's
now.
your warning right there. Another one of this issues, and we'll ask you to
Order,
leave,
Madam
please.
Chair.
Pardon me, you wrote the contract and didn't even put it out for 30 days, Ms. Goodwin. I'm just addressing stuff that you said yourself. I'm addressing that. You've had a failure for free and appropriate education within the school system. My son's failure to meet requirements with IDEA for children with disabilities, that's not been addressed. He went to summer school this summer, and no one even addressed it, but they cut his occupational therapy, his physical therapy, and his speech therapy. And yet none of you act as if you know anything about that. I've had one school board member say, well, part of your problems are your ex-wife. So that's not personal? You brought that up. I've never called for anybody's job at that school. I've said that you should be supporting that person to the most of your experience. 2 of you said we go to Oak Park, but we went to the graduation. But did you go to the principal and the teachers of that school and ask them what they need to do their jobs appropriately? A photo op is not an opportunity to do anything at a school. To just show up and say, well, we're doing something is ridiculous. You know, I find it unbelievable that you can sit up here right now and question me about free speech. I've served overseas in this country to give you the free speech to sit up there on a school board, and you're going to sit here and challenge me on what I'm going to say? I'm meeting within the 3 minutes that you give me. You sat up here 2 weeks in a row and talked about travel, about trips. I'm going to do this, but it's not at the expense of the school board. I encourage you to get as much as you can, but I didn't come here to hear you talk about trips. If there was a problem like there is at Oak Park, then I would address it. Nobody has said anything about that. What they've said is that Manatee County schools have 7,000 more students, and 1/3 the assaults that you've had at the school at Oak Park.
Thank you.
1/3.
Thank you. Dan Lobeck.
I'm sorry, how long did we get?
3 minutes.
Wow.
You can do it.
First, I'd like to object to the fact that it's only 3 minutes. I'm used to 5 for something this important. Amazing. Anyway, I'd like to talk to you about impact fees. Your budget spends all your impact fees for this coming fiscal year and out into the future on the purchase of school sites. Yet you've got a site for kindergarten, actually K through 8 in West Villages, that you're going to want to build, I would think, at some point. You've got plans for expansions of schools. Your schools are bursting at the seams at the K through 12 and the high school level, getting beyond capacity, and right now in many instances. You need more money for addressing the needs of growth. And what are you going to do? Put it on the backs of the tax-paying public? Your budget says you're strapped for cash for capital improvements because of reduction of revenues from the state and the millage that they allow for capital projects. You're going down in capital revenue. Yet your impact fees are at 1/4 of what your consultant recommended. in 2016, one of the lowest in the state. Now, I understand the developers, and rule me out of order if you want to, Madam Chair, for saying this, but I know the developers have a lot of clout in the school board elections. They're very generous with their campaign cash. But like the Bible says, you can't serve two masters. And it is scandalous that this school board has impact fees at the rock bottom of the barrel compared to other districts in this state, and is not planning for the needs of growth. Is allowing our classrooms to get crowded now as well as in the future. All this urban sprawl, and what are you going to do when you need to build those schools? You don't have the money. And unless you sacrifice maintenance, school safety, other purposes for which your capital funds are devoted. I know you're looking at reanalyzing this next year, perhaps even this year after the school year starts, I found out. Nothing's been done yet. It needs to be #1 priority to bring impact fees up to where they need to be, make growth pay its own way, serve the students, not the big developers, and get the job done. That's what I see in your budget here today. It's just not doing the job in making growth pay for the school needs this year, this coming year, and in the years to come. It's scandalous. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, I am really hesitant when somebody gets up and says things that we don't like to tell them to stop speaking. I sat here, multiple people asked me to resign. Madam Chair, you did not tell those people to stop, and nor would I want you to tell those people to stop. Those people were wrong because there's no complaint against Eric Robinson. That's a whole nother story. But they have that right. They have that right to address the government. That's the right of redress to your government is a fundamental right that U.S. citizens hold. Mr. Loback and I don't agree on many things, but I would never stop Mr. Loback's right to get up and speak and to have his voices heard. That is a fundamental right. And I also served in the military, so I understand what you did. And so I want to thank you. I was a CB, and I was in the first Gulf War. So I understand how precious these rights are to people. And so I think that if to really respect the freedom of speech means that you believe that the people who disagree with you the most have the right to speak. Because if you don't believe that the right of the people who disagree with you have the right to free speech, then you really don't believe in the right to free speech.
Mrs. Zucker?
I agree with you, Dan. We really do need to raise our impact fees. They were very low. We started with them being very low with the understanding that we would eventually increase them. And I think now is the time that we should be looking at increasing our impact fees. So I totally agree with you because there's all building that needs to be done. The schools are now crowded, and especially in South County. So, and also to you, Mr. Weiss, I have been to Oak Park. I met with the whole team, with Jamie, the principal, and the whole team, and I met with parents in the library afterwards on another date. So I've been there.
Mrs. Ziegler?
Thank you. So I'm going to take this two parts. First, I'll speak to Mr. Robinson's statements, and I would echo that. I will always support decorum and civility, but as Mr. Robinson had indicated, we are a government body, and there is the right to petition your government is a fundamental right, whether it be objectionable or negative or what have you to any of us. I know I've certainly taken it, and that's what you do when you step into this position. That's potentially that potentially may happen. I am very concerned that I just don't want this to be something that we go down a path in any way when anyone comes to speak, because that will likely intimidate or prohibit people from coming to speak, and that is a horrible way to operate. Our job is to serve our community and to be available and to hear them speak. And even if you disagree, this is their opportunity to do so in a public hearing. The second thing on the impact fees is, I think that it was mentioned that this would be coming up again, and my question is going to be posed to Dr. Bowden. Is there a study or anything coming forward? I know when the initial consultants did a study, there was, measurements of growth, which I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I don't believe that we actually hit those numbers. And so there was question as to whether it was more aggressive than actual. And so if you went back and reevaluated it, were we aligned to what those numbers of growth were at that time?
I am aware of the study that you refer to. I do not have in my current plan of work to revisit impact fees unless directed to do so by this board.
Thank you.
Mrs. Brown.
I too respect, person's right to be able to speak, but I don't think it's in our best interest to set the precedent that parents, when they have a complaint about how their student is treated in school, come in and air it at a board meeting and make accusations to board members. We're not supposed to be talking during this part. We normally don't. But when accusations are made, and I guess I was included in that too as somebody who didn't care, it's difficult not to respond to it. I think we'll go down a very wrong path if we start encouraging parents to come to the board meeting to discuss issues rather than talking to their school administration. And if they can't deal with their school administration, they can send us a personal email, either to the whole board or individual members, that we will refer to the executive director overseeing that group that would talk to them. Board members, we do the budget, we hire the superintendent, but we do not go in and oversee the day-to-day activities of a school. If we get letters, and we've talked to Dr. Bowden about this, I know I have, other people have too. I've had interchanges with a lot of parents on more than one side about this issue, and not everyone agrees that the administration is wrong. There are people that contacted me that were very happy about what's happening, although they do feel that there are, like I said, some people pushing buttons and scaring people, and we need to make sure that parents follow the proper channels to try to address their problems. That's what needs to be done. I mean, this is all public record. This is all being aired. I mean, I don't want a parent coming in here and telling everyone about the problem with their child. I know you feel that your child is beyond that you can do that. That's fine. But I think some parents may be stepping into something that they don't want to see happen if, in fact, their name gets in the paper and everything else. The board table generally is not the way to handle an issue with one child and one parent. That should be done through the administration. And if the administration isn't helping you, or first your teacher, then your administration. And if that doesn't help, a letter to the superintendent or a board member, an email or a phone call. Emails work best. There's a public record on that, and you can see what's happened. And I would think that's the way. And when those avenues are exhausted, we ask you to come and speak at a budget meeting. Tell us about something in the budget that you don't like, and try to work through the administration. Or, as I said, the board table really isn't the way, because once in a while there's something that comes up, but parents have met with board members, teachers have met with board members, and board members have contacted and talked to teachers and parents in the individual. And I tried talking to you last time after the meeting, and you were just angry, and it was very difficult to talk to. So this isn't really the place to handle those kinds of discussions. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to speak before I turn it over to you, Mrs. Ziegler. It's not my intention to not allow someone to speak, but when a person gets up and defames somebody sitting on this board's character, I am going to push back because that's not appropriate. In statute, it's not appropriate. And, to start making insinuations and innuendos of sexual natures and other things that are unproven, I won't put up with it. And probably if it was you again, Mr. Eric Robinson, I would probably say something to somebody as well, because I think we have gone down a rabbit hole, and I think we need to be civil. Look, we have children who are watching this. We have children who sit on our board, starting with school. We'll be sitting right down next to Mr. Hardy, and we better be civil with each other. We have too much discourse in this nation to begin with. If you want to say something to me privately, or you want to say something and ask me a question, I have no problem with that, answering my phone all the time or talking to you on email, but I don't think this is the appropriate place to defame someone's character, and I'm not going to have it, and I don't think it's the right thing to do. So that's really my intention, and according to statute, we do have a way of saying to people, no, we won't have that. Mrs. Ziegler.
Thank you. So I agree with what Mrs. Brown said. In general, there's a best practice of a chain that's probably the most effective way to advocate for your child should you feel that there is something not taking place that you believe is wrong, whatever it may be. I mean, it could be a myriad of things. But again, and that's just a general statement. I don't disagree with that, but I certainly believe that as elected officials who are elected by this community, in the event, whether right or wrong, perception or reality, that someone feels as though those chain of commands have been exhausted or they want to make us aware, I just want, in general, this area to always be welcome for any member of the community. Again, civility should always stand. The defamation components should be followed for everyone in here across the board. And I'll tell you, listen, I think when you are a public official, you kind of expose yourself to that risk. And so I fully feel that someone should be able to come up here and say what they say in the civil component and the decorum that we respect and demand of this chamber. And when the opportunity presents itself, anyone who wants to rebut in general, I would say, of any items that were stated, by all means. I would say that I found it frustrating, and even as I've seen here, we have to consider if you're going to respond to a comment that was made, you could, as we've done in the past, is ask for someone to step outside from a member of staff, that we've done before, to address some concerns that have been done. So there is not this dialogue back and forth, because that's, one, not very wise from a decorum standpoint, but it also limits the ability for that individual to respond back, and we're in a public meeting. So I think there's just a level of decorum that may need to be readdressed by the members of this board, and realize that there may be things that come forward that are not always complimentary. And I do think there's an opportunity for any one of us to speak to some of the concerns raised. I would just caution when we're raising them directly to individuals, especially as Mrs. Brown mentioned, some of these have to do with individual students, and we want to be cautious of that. But I think we certainly can generalize comments or sidebar it. But again, what the expectation is of speakers, I would say we would have to hold that same expectation of us. So that's...
Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, the adoption of the 2019 proposed millage rate. May I have a motion?
The following millage rates be adopted as presented.
Second.
Wait a minute. This is
Eric?
No, I have to finish it.
I believe the rates have to be read into the record.
Required local effort, 3.093.
Excuse me, I believe that's 3.695.
695. My voting cue is on top of the motion. Okay, discretionary operating at .748, capital 1.5 mils, total millage 1 mil, total for 6.943 mils.
Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, I second it. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. Have you lost weight, Mr. Bowden? First the tie. Oh, it looks like you're losing weight. I just want to clarify some things. Ms. Goodwin at the beginning talked about the rollback rate and how it's higher than the rollback rate, but the actual millage rate is less than last year, correct? I don't want to get lost on somebody reporting that the millage rate went up, because Ms. Goodwin was talking about the rollback rate. Yeah. One of the speakers talked about the capital fund going down, but my math, 126 to 131 million is a larger number than 126. Is that, Mitzi, in your world, is 131 million larger than? She's shaking her. I just want to make sure everybody knows that the capital fund is growing, not shrinking. And I just want to make sure the motion that I seconded, the capital millage rate is 1.5, and that number isn't going down. It's the same as it was before. So I just wanted to clarify there was some numbers that were thrown about that I questioned, and so I just want to make sure that people understood capital money going up, millage going down, capital rate is staying flat. So,
may I just clarify for the record that the 1.5 millage rate as proposed for, I may not be close enough to it, but it's on, is consistent with prior years, but it is not the historical amount, just so we have it in perspective. Historically, that amount was 2.0, but you're absolutely correct when saying that rate is being held consistent with the prior year.
Okay. Any other discussion? Please vote. And the vote passes 5-0.
I would move that the 2019-2020 fiscal year tentative budget be adopted as presented.
Hold on a second.
It's 6.
We're on 5.
You're now on opening the public hearing on the budget.
Opening the public hearing of citizens.
I didn't want to hear from you all.
and we have one card from Dan Lobeck.
Turns out because I just arrived, I got up for the wrong agenda item last time. So now I have 6 minutes total to talk about impact fees. And Mr. Robinson, to address your point, and I know that you and Ms. Ziegler have been those that are against adequate impact fees historically. But you get a lot of support from the developers. I understand that. But they need to go up, and I'm shocked to hear from the administrator that he doesn't have marching orders to review impact fees, because at a Tiger Bay meeting not long ago, I forget who it was, said that is on the school board agenda moving forward. So if it's not, it needs to be. And at some point that needs to be on your agenda and move forward. The reason the capital millage went down is not because of anything that you all have done. The state reduced your capital millage from 2.0 to 1.5 and did so recently, I think effective this year. And the reason you may have a couple years ago, recently, the reason that you may have more funds in your capital budget is that the beginning fund balances for impact fees and other things have accumulated. You're starting off with a $12 million beginning fund balance in impact fees. You've got these additional funds from the state for school hardening. I'm glad to see what you're doing, front-loading that, although there's millions every year that are being put off because you don't have adequate impact fees to pay for the growth things. So other capital needs get neglected. And with regard to school enrollment, Ms. Ziegler, your own budget, or maybe it's your capital improvement program that was recently adopted, says in there, the current reading of staff is that you've got a 1.5% population growth that this county is going through, and that more than 10% of that growth is going to be materialized in public school students, traditional public plus charter. So you've got the recent data, and it shows that you're having growth that you're not planning for. And I'll tell you, when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, and Schrader Manatee is demanding their school, and the West Villages need their school, and you need just from normal growth in the existing urban areas, much less all this urban sprawl. Clark Road property is another example. What are you going to do when you don't have adequate impact fees? You're going to be talking about putting the taxpayers in deep, deep debt, borrowing, whether it's certificates of participation or whether it's traditional bonding. You're going to be looking at putting that on the backs of the taxpaying public. And I can tell you right now, that is a major issue. And you know, funding for schools hasn't been a big issue in school board campaigns, but if I have anything to do about it, it's going to start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a good one.
Dr. Bowden?
I understand that we have already voted on the millage rates for next year, but just to go on record, I just want to take you through the millage rate so we have clear definitions of prior years and recency. In the 2007-2008 was the most recent year at which the capital millage assessment was at 2.0. For the 08-09 school year, it was reduced, correctly stated by the state, to 1.75. In the 2009-10 school year, it was further reduced to 1.5, where it has remained until the current day. The reduction in millage rates is not a function of capital. It is the rollback on the operating millage.
Mrs. Zucker?
What I wanted to say was the other part, that component that's missing, is our PICO funding, public education and capital outlay. This is the first year where public schools do not receive any funding through PICO. Only the charter schools do. So all the charter schools throughout the state receive PICO funding, and we do not. So there was a loss of revenues because of that.
Mr. Robinson?
Again, I just wanted to correct the record. When I was talking about the 126 to 131 million, I was not talking about the fund balance. I was talking about the fund revenue. So when you talked about the fund balance is also going up. So the fund revenue is going up and the fund balance is going up. So the 126, 131 was fund revenue. We have the fund balance going up. We have a 5-year plan, and we have it going up between now and then the next 5 years, and that's even with us sharing money with charter schools, and that's projected in the 5-year plan. So, fund revenue going up, fund balance going up, and just as a point of clarification, I wasn't on the school board when they voted on impact fees, so I just want to make sure I clarify that issue too.
Dr. Bowden?
If I may clarify Mr. Robinson's remarks, he's looking at a 5-year capital plan and looking at the fund balance in capital projects. In the budget that's being presented to you in item 6, there is a decline just based on the timing of projects. It shows a beginning fund balance of $49,780,154 with an ending balance of $31,502,468. That is for the most immediate year, the 1920 year. If you look at the 5-year plan in totality, the fund balance does increase.
Any other questions or comments? Moving on to item number 6, the adoption of the 2019-2020 tentative budget.
I would move that the 2019-2020 fiscal year tentative budget be adopted as presented.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Brown?
I'll second that, but then I have comments on the budget.
Mrs. Brown?
On page 4 of the executive summary, and Mr. Rice, you might be interested in looking at that. It shows that in the year 2009, 2010, we had per student from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the dollar amounts per student.
Yep.
In 2010, it was $1,643, then it went up to $1,662, went up to $1,876, and I'm on page 4 of the executive summary.
Right here.
And then 2012 to 2013, it went up to $1,954 per student. Since then, it has dropped remarkably every year. It's kind of slowed, but it went down from 1954 to 1654 to 1421. It is now at 1315. So as we are seeing more and more challenges with our students, the dollar amount that we are getting from the federal government on a per student basis has dropped over about $650 per student. Per student. So it's about 2/3 of what it was. And so we're still trying to overcome that. There's a lot of information in this budget that you can look at like that. We can look at, we talk about the capital funds and how they were. You're right. We used to be at 2 mils. We were docked down to 1.5. Then the PICO dollars were cut. We've had some, but last year we didn't get additional dollars at all. This year we were fortunate that the legislature did give us additional dollars, but the legislature truly is the one who sets what our tax rates are, except for that we go out for a voted referendum millage. We were fortunate enough that it was over 70%, wasn't it about 77, 75%? 77% last year supported us. Without that extra mill from this community, it would be difficult to provide the services and the educational opportunities we do for these students. And I want to commend the superintendent for bringing us this budget, because I still, I'm reeling over last year's budget, and I know we had to make some changes, but that we were still able to, when the state is holding back on the dollars that we used to be able to collect for as the property values increase, we're not able to take advantage of that. But on the federal government, the students with disabilities, that funding was cut by 1/3 over the last 7 years. I'm speaking, sir, thank you. And I think that's an area that, I think we can work with our people on and get to work on that.
Mrs. Ziegler?
Sorry, I have a mint in my mouth, so, okay. No, I think Mrs. Brown raises a good point, and I think as we, I know today's a budget hearing, but a lot of this impacts our level of service and what we're able to do for our students, and specifically as the concerns have been brought forward in an abundance, and I understand from the Oak Park standpoint. I know Mrs. Brown just referenced page 4 of the executive summary as far as the IDEA, and if you look at it, 2014, 15, it absolutely is a stark decline from 2011-12, and then it somewhat flatlines. And so a couple things that I think is really important as we try to find the best solutions with which our jurisdiction's allowed to, and then highlight maybe what's caused some of these issues, whether vis-a-vis state or some federal funding. But I think, as I've talked to the superintendent about that, I think it's really important that you absolutely recognize them and what that impact is, but also really take a hard look at what we can do within our parameters and then advocate accordingly as whatever can be changed. I worry that funding absolutely makes a difference. There's no question about that. But if you look historically in the last 5 years, the drastic difference from 2012 2011 has kind of been a flat line. So I don't want that to, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, I don't want to make assumptions that that's solely any reason for perhaps any disruption or as far as it relates to our ESE services. And second would be, I know Mr. Robinson brought this up, I think, at the last budget hearing, and it was, and I know I brought it up when we talked about capital, the Venice wing, when we were in Venice at a meeting, and it really came down to, as we evaluate if there was a capacity issue at Venice High School and whether we were to build an additional wing or renovate or build a new school, I mean, all those other things, and whether or not we would want to go out for a referendum for capital dollars. And I'm not suggesting that that's it, but I do believe there are mechanisms within our taxing authority to illustrate, go through the budget, identify where there's true deficits from a level of service, and strategically try to change our practices. And in the event there's somewhere that we can make a case that we need additional dollars, the better place to do it is local anyway, because you have the most accountability and you can see the impact. So when we talk about dollars, I think it's very easy to do a pointing of fingers or blame shift, but I do believe that we have mechanisms within our jurisdiction to fix some of these problems. So,
Mr. Robinson?
I'm sure this won't be a surprise to anybody. I'm not going to be supporting the budget, and just to give some highlights of why. The main reason is the deficit spending, which I'm not going to belabor the point. I think I've said that enough, and I think I've used enough analogies, and I've run out of analogies, I think. The other reason is, there's although we're deficit spending, I don't think we're still spending in the right places. And I'll give my two examples that I've used every time, so it shouldn't be a shock to anybody. Garden Elementary went from an A to a C. They were an A when I first started talking about this, but when a school goes from A to a C, that is not the time to cut funding to that school, and we're cutting the homeschool liaison at that school, which is something that's needed greatly. And talking about Venice, and this is Venice Middle, but that we're cutting the Young Marines program, which is a character building, which for middle school is important too. But I do want to piggyback on what Ms. Ziegler said and what I had said at the last meeting. The way in which we derive the authority to do our millage in a global way. I understand that the capital, we could choose some number below 1.5, but in essence, our millage is either dictated by the state or dictated by the citizens. And so if we have an issue, and I'm not advocating we're doing this, but if we feel that we are not able to provide a certain level of service, or the state isn't doing, is ignoring us, or we have a problem with the state, we have the ability to ask the citizens. We do it in the referendum, but if the board chose, they could go and ask the citizens, do you want to be taxed more? Which is, I'd rather you went and asked the citizens than Tallahassee, because they're the ones who are actually going to be stroking the checks. It's their pocketbook. So we can't simply say it's people in Tallahassee who are doing this. We have the ability to go out to the citizenry, to the taxpayers, and put the question to them to increase the taxes, to fund the level of service, to close the deficit. Again, I'm not advocating we do that. I'm just saying it's not simply Tallahassee won't let us, woe is me. We have multiple options at the table, and so I think if we really have an issue that is causing a level of service, then I think we should explore all issues available to us. If we're going to pay a lobbyist to go up to Tallahassee to lobby in one direction, why wouldn't you look at all the options that are on the table?
Mrs. Zucker?
The one entitlement funding, which I'd like to point out to you, is the federal funds mandated services is the Individuals with Disabilities Education, the IDA Act. And due to the decreased allocation, the general operating fund is now having to fund a larger number of positions that were previously funded with federal funds. So built into this 2018-2019 estimated operation budget, federal funds in similar amounts for the 2019-2020. So that's part of the reason why we have less money, because we have to take it. It's not coming down from the state like it should be for our most vulnerable students.
Mrs. Brown?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the state legislature has set the funding levels for each of our school districts, and they hold that very, very jealously. They get very upset with districts when they try to raise their own rates, and they have been taking actions to make it harder for districts to do that by saying when they can do it and what they can do with that money, and some of those other things. I would be concerned about increasing it and then having the state turning around and telling us we would have to do something else. One thing that I learned in the legislature was that if you didn't like something that was in the budget that was brought forth by the budget committees, what you could do is offer an amendment. And we had discussed these things in committee workshops. I haven't seen any amendments offered. The superintendent brought the budget forward. This is where he says we should spend the money. If you think we should be taking money from this fund and putting it over there, I mean, I would like to see an offer where you have an amendment, where you have that back and forth, so we see that. And that, hopefully, next year that would come up in a workshop session and not wait till we got to the budget. But I still think that there's time if, in fact, there's an argument to be made that we could take something from here and put it into there, that an amendment could be offered perhaps in another workshop. But that's always an option. But to just say spend it here, there's two sides to that. Where is that money coming from is one of the issues. And one thing that I've been talking to some people about this past week, and it was over an article that was in the paper about the Sela Foundation. What several districts in this state have is a children's services tax. I think rather than seeing the school district go out and get another tax, I'd like to see our community stand up to do a children's services tax so that we can take children, as Dr. Hill and the Healthy Start Group want to do, those first 100 days, how important those first 100 days are to get services that first 3 years. Get services to those kids. Provide other issues for them. Also, if a child has with an adverse childhood event, the ACE group is looking at those types of things so that when a police officer is in a home and they arrest a family member for domestic battery or whatever happens in that home the night before, that services can be provided to that child so that we have families that are homeless, that services can be provided to those things. And these are some of the, also for quality child care, maybe certified teachers in pre-K. These are some of the things that the children's services tax could provide, and I'd like to work with a group of people looking at a children's services tax to provide some of these services that many other counties already provide, and I don't know why Sarasota hasn't done that yet, but I want to look into that and see that that might be something that we can do, not as a school district, but as a community, to meet the needs of all of our students, especially those younger before they come to our schools, and those who have problems once they do enter our schools that we don't know about, that happen out in the community that are beyond our realm. There are a lot of issues that our children need, and I think this is a way of providing that.
Well, I think that's a great idea, and I think some of our best people are working on that in this county. I think that there's a group that's already looking at a Children's Council has been looking at it for about 5 years. But I would just say that the reason we don't have a balanced budget is because last year we had 47 cents in base student allocation. And it doesn't take long to understand that sort of turns the budget upside down, and we're still digging ourselves out of that. And hopefully we'll have a balanced budget by next year. And I feel that we will do that. Fortunately for us, we are one of the richer counties on the coast and have the ability of raising some money, and property values have increased a great deal, I think from $53 billion to about $64 billion in the last 3 years. Although if you look at how we had to roll back our required local effort thanks to the legislature, we lost in the first 3 years of that $94 million without looking at the compounding faction. So I think there are lots of reasons why we're in the position we're in, none of them largely caused by what's happening here in this district, but some of the things that have been legislative mandates. Looking at our lobbyist has been talking to Jacob Oliva, the Chancellor of Education, today about Oak Park and some ideas for some changes, and when I get more information about that, I'll share that with all of you. And we're looking at, doing a lot of things and having some more flexibility. First, for getting students out of this horrible testing, which we all do too much testing for every student, never mind for students with special needs. But also, the kinds of things that, whether a child is in a regular class and not having a special diploma anymore at Oak Park has definitely affected, how we do business there. And it's my contention that, the centers that are around the state, of which there are not a lot, but the centers that we have, as we have at Oak Park, probably are frowned on a little bit legislatively. I think that a lot of people in the legislature think a lot of those students with severe needs would go to a private school, and that we would be able to mainstream many of our students into regular public schools. So, we're really proud of Oak Park, and we intend to continue with that effort in that model. But it's going to take some time and some effort to perhaps change things, either on the federal level with the funds being decreased from IDEA, as well as from the state level. So we'll look forward to hoping that happens. But I will definitely vote for this tentative budget, and I think that we're moving along quite nicely, considering the things that have happened in the last couple of years, both from a capital standpoint, losing PICO funds, sharing funds with the charter schools more than we really had to, as well as the issues that we have with the rollback of the required local effort. Al Widener, who was Mitzi's assistant for 38 years or so, used to come to us in the spring and say, "I have a surprise for you," and it would be the growth that we had every year. And it's been a different day since we haven't had that. Mr. Robinson.
I think our deficit, the reason why we have it is a little bit more complicated than last year's BSA, although I certainly agree that as a factor, I think it's a little bit more complex about all the issues that are causing that to occur. But I want to address Mrs. Brown's comments. I just want to make sure I clarify this. And I've said this multiple times, but it's on the communicator to make sure that their voice is heard correctly. I was not advocating for new funding. I was not advocating for additional funding. I was not advocating for more money. I was advocating for not having a cut. I was advocating to keep it the same. So I've said this multiple times. I brought it up at workshops. I brought it up at just every workshop. Last meeting, I didn't bring it up because I didn't want to belabor the point, but maybe if me not bringing it up as a time, maybe that's my fault, and maybe I should bring it up every single meeting if that's what needs to be done. But we've added things to the budget. For example, registered nurses. There was never any discussion about what the offsetting entry was to pay for that. That's not historically how we've done things. But certainly, I'm talking about not cutting something. I am not talking about adding something. I'm talking about maintaining the revenue that exists as of last year. And so I'm not asking for additional money, Ms. Brown. So I agree. If you wanted to create a policy that said if somebody wanted to ask for additional money, you got to say where you're getting that money from. But that is not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating that the Young Marines program, their funding not get cut. I'm advocating that the homeschool liaison at Venice Garden not get cut. I'm not advocating to add to it. And there's plenty of things in the budget where, for example, diverting money into the capital dollars that Mr. Lobeck, wants to cherish so much and wants to make sure we have the money to grow schools, but that money is going over to charter schools. It wasn't presented in an amendment. It was presented of, hey, this is what we're gonna spend this money over in the charter schools. That wasn't done in an amendment format. Dr. Bowden brought it to us, allowed the board as a whole to decide that, and the majority of the board wanted to do that, so it's in the budget, and it was the will of the board. We didn't go through and say, okay, we're going to take off this project instead of that project, replace it. We never did that, and again, that was new money. So to say that if you want to keep the status quo is to not cut Young Marines program for Venice Middle School, that somehow or another you need to find a funding source to keep something at the same level it was before. I wish you would have told me that before, because I had brought this up on multiple occasions, and if you're going to create a rule that applies to me, then that rule should apply to everybody.
Mrs. Zucker?
Do we still have the waiver process, Dr. Bowden?
Yes, we do.
So therefore, Garden Elementary is able to waive another part of what they're getting for schools to keep their homeschool liaison. Is that correct?
Would you like me to speak to Garden specifically?
Yes, please.
The issues emanating from Garden are a result of them losing their Title I status. This board did not make a decision, and I am not recommending a cut to the funding at Garden. They will no longer be receiving Title I dollars as a designated Title I school. And so they have made a decision in the absence of Title I dollars, which was the funding source for not just this position, but other positions at Garden. But there is no reduction in operating dollars by this board. It is a result of them losing their title status. But if they wish to do a waiver within their existing operating budget and restore that position, that waiver would be evaluated on its face.
Mrs. Brown?
I'm not going to try to explain budget processes anymore. I don't know if somebody really doesn't understand it, but if you want to spend here, you have to take it away there, and we're not treating people differently. It's just a matter of process, and I'm beyond trying to teach somebody process. I'm not going to do it. I decline.
Mrs. Ziegler?
Just for anyone watching, because I think it's interesting and relevant, is Title I is defined by 75% of the student population and free or reduced lunch. Is that correct?
We control the definition within the school district of Title I. So a Title I school in Sarasota County would have a different definition than in Manatee County. Our allocation of Title I dollars is set in a federal formula based on population and other factors, which is why it's extremely important we have an accurate census, as an aside. That has a lot to do with how those dollars are allocated. And so we receive an allocation of Title I dollars, and then we set thresholds to be a, quote, Title I school.
And how often, may I follow up?
Sure.
So how often do we reevaluate the definition, how we define it as a school district, as far as what Title I's definition is?
We have the ability to do it on an annual basis.
Do you know when the last time is? And I'm sorry, I'm throwing this at you, not in... Well,
that's why I'm trying to answer the question you're asking, which is we have the ability, but I cannot recall the last time we adjusted that threshold.
And I actually didn't...
5 years?
Yeah.
So it's reevaluated every year. Is it possible to understand specifically what that is? And the reason is in general, because a small decline in whatever our calculation is can actually, as we have heard here, can have a serious implication to that respective school. And when their student population really isn't necessarily changing, or those needs aren't changing as dramatically as potentially that financial impact. So when we do reevaluate it, is that part of the equation when we look at the student population, the respective schools, when a school goes from Title I to non-Title I? I mean, I quite frankly, I don't know what the compliance component, when do we have to report that to the state? I mean, what does that look like? Because I think that's very relevant to at least this particular circumstance.
Well, and I'd be happy to prepare a workshop on the topic. There are a number of variables. Title I dollars are decreasing, and so part of the decision is if Garden were to remain designated as a Title I school, then you would have to reduce Title I funding at all of our title schools. And so that would have impact on our neediest schools like Emma E. Booker. And so we make decisions based on dollars that are allocated. That's also a variable in the setting of those thresholds. But given some time, I can give you a history of how those thresholds have moved around. We are seeing free and reduced lunch rates across the district decreasing.
And I don't want to direct that if that's, but I do think it's an interesting topic, especially as we realize, we consider the implications and how those funding functions work. And again, we use the word level of service, and and we brought up the waiver component, but there clearly are some other elements and layers that perhaps we may want to be aware of as we look at the financial structures and how to support individual schools or the district overall.
So there's one other I'd just like to get out there where we're having this conversation and not belabor the point, but when you talk about what you fund with Title I dollars, the federal government is very specific that they do not want you to supplant the use of general fund dollars. And so if you use the example at Garden and say, in the absence of Title I dollars, we are going to continue to fund the homeschool liaison, Title I would then call into question the use of Title I funds to pay for the homeschool liaison at the remaining title schools, because they would say, but you're providing that position to this school in the absence of title funds, which means you should provide it to the other Title I schools. Why are they not getting this position just because they're on Title I? And so if this board were to direct that the homeschool liaison position be returned to the budget at Garden, from a compliance perspective, I would then recommend that every homeschool liaison that are currently at our Title I schools come off of the Title I funding source and move to general fund.
I can remember when the highest amount was like 84%, and now it's like 94%. We had a big jump. But when the Department of Ed, in lieu of the federal government, looks at this, they look at the total of all schools that we have and make those decisions based on the total, correct?
Sorry.
Are you done?
Nope.
All right, go right ahead, Mrs. Ziegler.
And I don't equally want to belabor the point, but I think it's relevant as, even if we think of the macro discussion of where we have control, where we don't, federal, state, school board, and this particular topic came up, and quite frankly, there certainly seems to be you tug here, it impacts somewhere else, but to be fair, I believe you brought this up at a budget workshop in general, and so I think it's just the broader question of what that calculation looks like, and being aware of where we do have some authority, but also being aware of what those implications would be. And so it's not just a flip of a switch, they change their percentage, or that's a simplification of the calculation, but to just, the way it was discussed as a board, it seemed like it was a very slight switch, but when in fact we may have had, and again, I don't mean to isolate one specific school, I'm just saying the general decision-making process, it seems that there is some authority to have a little bit more directional focused on supportive services. So I'm done now, Mrs. Good.
Thank you. If there is no other discussion, let's vote. And the vote passes 3-2. Surprise. And next, we are ready to adjourn this meeting. Our next monthly school board meeting will be August the 6th, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. in these chambers. We're adjourned.